Welcome to the second lecture of the lecture series, Psychology of Wellbeing. Well, in the previous lecture, we saw that how it's important not only to look at the question what well-being is, but also the where part of it. Under what circumstances, under what conditions, under what kind of social hierarchies, we should try to understand its lived experiences of having good life or the struggles for that. In the same line of thought, it's important to look at the context of a majority of citizens of the world who are affected by the whole economic context or the whole economic globalization that we have been facing. And if the question of class hierarchy or other kinds of social hierarchies are important, it's important to see that how those kinds of social hierarchies are further aggravated or problematized or made a bit more challenging by economic globalization, or maybe a blind following of economic globalization without critical thinking regarding what's happening to the well-being of people in general. So, outline of this talk, we are going to get into the whole question of how global economic order may shape well-being at a local level, at the level of people's life, neoliberal globalization and how it shapes the social hierarchies, and the struggles for good life or well-being in the new liberal era. We'll be taking some examples from Indian youth and also migrant laborers' life in the new liberal context. By new liberal, again, we mean economic globalization context. And we'll be looking at pre and post COVID scenarios of migrant laborers' life. And then the final question of how to address the structural change, I beg your pardon, for well-being. So why is it important? Again, as I mentioned earlier from the previous lecture, we could note that well-being within social hierarchies are important, but to be able to situate that within global economic order is also critical. So we could note that inequality and indifference are faced by a majority of world's and India's citizens. We had the data regarding that on the basis of hierarchies of class, race, religion, and gender. You could also note as Martin Luther King Jr. 1968 and Jesse Jackson in 2000, they reminded us about this, that among the prominent, they have been the prominent scholars to have reminded us about the need to bring about the structural changes in economic and social policies of the nations through creative maladjustment or questioning our complacency or attitude that forms the foundation of inequality and indifference. So the question of miseries of people or challenges that are posed to well-being because of hierarchies of class, race, and religion, and how that has been maintained if we are not able to come out of our complacency. And that's where the whole concept of, or the whole phenomenon of creative maladjustment comes in, which is being told by Dr. King Jr. and Jesse Jackson. That is to question our complacency or attitude that forms the foundation of inequality and indifference. Now, in this lecture, we will learn how economic globalization, as I told earlier, has helped increase inequality and indifference by maintaining or strengthening hierarchies that further makes people struggle to attain well-being or good life. Well, it's important then to look at the nature of economic globalization. So what is it? What is economic or neoliberal globalization? According to Vijay Prashad, or these past decades, the ruling class or the capitalists or the wealthy people who run the multinational companies or who have an important say in international or national politics in the advanced capitalist countries have accelerated the withdrawal of its wealth from taxable pools, held them in tax havens or in exotic financial instruments, and have increasingly refused to invest it into the productive sector. These countries were forced, either by balanced budgetary amendments or by pressure from the International Monetary Fund, to stop raising taxes and to cut spending, particularly on the social side, the social service sector. The capitalist order over these past few decades developed a theory of state society relations that we know as neoliberalism or economic globalization. So it's important to look at the important features of it, which tends to um, focus more on gathering more and more wealth for some set of people rather than putting it for the common social good. So, what are some of the important characteristic features of neoliberal or new economic policies, and why is it important for well-being? So, the first important feature is reduction in public expenditure by the government, especially for the care sector. Now, it's important. The data tells us worldwide that there has been a reduction in public expenditure on especially health, education, and elder care. One can look around, one can look at the World Bank data, the other data at the national level, and that would be amply clear. We saw some of this in the previous um, lecture. Then the second one, privatization for a short-term infusion of cash, government sold of precious public assets, areas of social life that had been outside the profit motive, such as water delivery, were commodified. Now we got to, rather than have facility for free water, now that may still be there, but then there is a greater push towards purchase of water. That's happening worldwide, whether it is the US or India. And then most importantly, psychologically speaking, selling of dreams that the present is largely eternal and that what you experience now, this is being told implicitly to the people, that what you experience now is in your class is largely what your children and grandchildren shall experience. Technology will advance and things will get better. But your own place in the class structure, calcified by differences of social hierarchy, will remain. Now that's something which is kind of selling of dreams, and to a great extent these dreams are not only lived by people, but gradually they face the brunt of it because these are perhaps not fulfilled in terms of at least having a good life. We'll be having examples of that as we move ahead. All right, so neoliberal globalization and reshaping of social hierarchy, how does it happen? Well, social service for poor severely affected due to reduction in public expenditure by the government, that's known as austerity and privatization. Importantly, rather than addressing social hierarchies of class, gender, race, class, and religion, neoliberal policies tend to maintain status quo. Prashad also posits that as the dreams shown by neoliberal policies come out to be untrue, what happens then? We have a zombie-like situation, the death of, which means the death of ideal hope on the one hand, and at the same time, the existence of a callous hope that is crafted around hatred, a toxic hatred drawn from the old lineages of conservatism and tradition, and which sharpens its toxicity against women, foreigners, minority, and against anyone seen as the undeserving outsider. Now, it's going to be very interesting that how, when the dreams are lost, dreams that were shown by neoliberal globalization for a better future, then it results in all kinds of throwing off um, prejudice and discrimination and conflicts towards people who tend to be seen as undeserving outsiders, including women, foreigners, minorities. Now, that's how we could see that how the social hierarchies of gender, class, religion, ethnicity are further deepened or aggravated by neoliberal globalization or economic globalization because of selling of dreams, privatization, and then how those dreams are um, lost or come out to be untrue, and that leads to all kinds of chaotic conditions, further aggravating the social hierarchies. Now, we'll be taking some examples. As we have already observed in the previous lecture featuring re-traumatization caused by COVID-19, such social hierarchies and the resulting struggle for well-being among a majority of citizens has only aggravated due to process of othering or exclusion of weak, unproductive, traditional, or infected. How has life for citizens been before COVID-19 arrived, as far as the impact of neoliberal policies are concerned? We will look at this next with a focus on youth working in multinational companies and the same living in slums, and then also will be focusing on migrant laborers. Well, the struggles for a good life in the neoliberal era, what are the experiences of Indian youth, particularly working in the MNCs? With MNCs comes Western or modern worldview, and we will see that how that because of that, the youth's own values, traditional values, are compromised, giving them a whole lot of struggle related to their sense of well-being, and then the dreams of slum dwellers they become more and more unachievable. So we'll begin first with the MNCs, how people's or the workers, Indian workers' own values are compromised in the work life. Let's look at how. So Sunil Bhati explicates that the enforcement of an alien worldview or notions of selfhood on Indian youth in the multinational companies is based on an assumption that the youth's own traditional worldview is inferior as it is not as productive as the foreign worldview. Let's take some examples. So Americans generally have a self-concept that is linear active, or the one who plans ahead methodically, separates social and professional life. On the contrary, the Indians are taken to be multi-active, or the one who does multitasking, interweaves the social and the professional. Now, is that problematic? Let's see how. Sunil mentions Upadhyay's work, ethnographic work, who noticed that a young female trainee was disturbed by the imposition of American values on the natives' worldview, and she posited before the trainer that the multi-active style was as effective as linear active in reaching the company's goals. So what is the problem if we follow our own native style of working, if it is as effective as the alien or the American style that has been imposed on the MNC's working or work life? Well, the trainee got the reply from the trainer. We have to be realistic. Who dominates the corporate world? It is the US. And the American system is what has come to characterize the corporate world all over. So we have no choice but to follow that style. Now, interesting. This is one of the important and glaring impact of neoliberal policies or the economic globalization, where very silently youth's own values are getting compromised or they are being shown to be inferior. Again, all in the name of providing some kind of employment or jobs to some people. Definitely not all the people, all the youth. Let's move on to then a different set of youths who live in the who live in the, I beg your pardon, slums. And let's see that how the economic globalization has created a brunt for them too. Now, Sunil Bhatia also noted in his ethnographic study The youth living in the slums of Pune who felt deprived or deficient due to A. belonging to a lower economic class and B. class divide widened by neoliberal globalization. One such youth shared. What does he have to share? The real rich around here are not from proper Pune. These outsiders who come to Pune are wealthy people and they strike deals with local people, wealthy people, and they look out for their mutual interests. So the local rich people are becoming richer as new financial capital is coming in. The difference between the rich families and the families living in the basti or slum is that when a child is born in a rich and an educated family, the first question the parents ask is, what should I make him? Should I make him an engineer or something else? Then right from the beginning, the upper class folks will make sure that the entire educational apparatus is put in place for their child, so he is on the path to becoming an engineer. In our basti, we also start out with big ambition for our children, but then we realize that we don't have the resources. We want our children to be lawyers and doctors, and then we tell them to start doing labor, or we ask them to scale down their ambition due to lack of English education and good schooling. Now, again, coming back to the point that how belonging to a lower economic class and B, the class divide widened by neoliberal globalization is something that is very much evident, creating struggles for having good life or well-being. It's important that we talk about these two rather than just focusing on happiness, flourishing, or optimum psychological functioning. Who is going to talk about the struggles for that, which is present amongst a majority of citizens of the world or India? That's going to be very, very important. All right, so from there we move on to the migrant laborers' life in the neoliberal globalization context, and we'll be looking at pre and post COVID-19 situation. So similar to Sunil Bhatia's observations, Sangeeta Yadav's 2019 extensive work on well-being and mental health of migrant laborers also depicts how their life health or mental health has always been at risk, even before COVID-19 pandemic, owing to neoliberal policies induced othering they receive. So according to Canon, out of 418 workers in the informal sector, even before COVID-19 outbreak, about 67% of them were not getting 375 rupees 375, I beg your pardon, daily wage, or earning in case of self-employed individuals, recommended as the national minimum wage necessary to meet their household basic needs at 2017-18 prices. Well, that's something which happens before COVID-19 outbreak, the kind of uh, appalling situation or a situation filled with miseries in terms of what kind of um, challenges these laborers had to face. Well, during the pandemic, however, their plight has become worse. Now, Pandey and her colleagues have noted there is no legal protection for them in the post-COVID-19 lockdown period, despite central government's advisory to the employers or establishment for not terminating or doing pay cuts to any worker, including contract or temporary laborers. Excuse me, it will be extremely difficult to get legal justice against any termination or pay cuts for about 161 million workers because a worker in legal terms needs to have at least a 3-year contract with the employer. And again, it's so interesting that we are saying that the workers should not be thrown out, but are they really workers in legal terms? So that's the question that Sakpal has asked. The other one is inadequate relief. The Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or MNREGA that we popularly known as. Now, these workers Work discontinued due to the pandemic, and millions of migrant laborers without ration cards were excluded from this relief. Although some state governments had launched e-coupon facility for those who do not possess a ration card, the beneficiaries are not aware of it. Now that's another important thing that we need to. Now, due to uncertainty associated with the extension of lockdown and inadequate relief, lack of ration cards, and worries about the family, the migrant workers started reverse migrating to their villages. And this is midsummer that we are talking about. I think it was something around April or May 2020. Well, Dondaker and Ghai noted during that period that roughly more than 120 to 140 million such workers at the moment were either walking back or were stranded in various camps due to the effects of lockdown. 16 of these physically and mentally fatigued reverse migrating laborers were run over by a goods train in Aurangabad, Maharashtra, on 8 May 2020 in the morning hours. They were oblivious of any information about the timings of the train during lockdown, and to avoid police who were monitoring road route to their destination, slept on those railway tracks the previous night. Agrawal reports that at least 89 such deaths had occurred due to reverse migration since lockdown. Well, and then finally, those who were able to return to their villages, they faced exclusion due to the stigma of being termed as virus spreaders, with some of them made to live on the trees. That's reported in the Hindu newspaper. Well, all of it again brings back the whole question of, is it absolutely fine that we locate or we focus on well-being within the person in terms of happiness, in terms of flourishing and optimum psychological function? No doubt these are important parameters, these are important meanings of well-being that are present in the dominant literature or as dominant meanings of well-being. We'll be looking at this very soon in some other lectures also. But again, it's important not only to look at that, but also situate all such kinds of experiences of well-being or the struggles for that. Because unless we focus on such struggles which are very clear, critically linked to the social or class hierarchies, further aggravated as we have seen in this lecture, with the help of examples from youth working in the MNCs, youth living in the slums before the um, COVID-19, and also in the post-COVID-19 situation, we could see that how the miseries of the poor migrant laborers have been further aggravated. So unless we are able to locate the struggles for well-being as situated within class or economic and other kinds of social hierarchies, and economic hierarchies, again, I'll repeat, further aggravating other kinds of social hierarchies, it's going to be uh, some kind of being blind to the very lived realities of well-being or the struggles of that a majority of citizens of various countries of the world, including India, that they have to live with. So again, the call is for looking at the kind of challenges that are created by structures. By structures, we mean, again, the policy related, the economic policies, the social policies related processes, and how that affects the well-being or the struggles of well-being for people. And is it important to do something about that, at least try and understand that how such kind of miseries are shaped by the structural policy related processes. And then it's important to as Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out way back in 1968, that can we do something about bringing about a change as far as prejudice-based social hierarchies go. And again, for that to happen, we'll have to somewhere try and break such kinds of or do something about or address those kinds of complacency-laden prejudice that many of these people, many of the citizens have to face. And that is, again, as we have seen, further aggravated by the international politics or further aggravated by the international economic realities of economic globalization. So then we come to the final part of it, and I'll be repeating some of the points that I have already said regarding the relationship between social hierarchies and struggles for well-being, and in turn how those social hierarchies are further related to or further deepened by the economic globalization, and what can be done regarding that. So what follows from above is a meaningful or serious discussion on well-being of the majority of world's or India's population that needs engagement with existing structural or socioeconomic policy related conditions shaped by neoliberal globalization. The effects of neoliberalism on class-based and other social hierarchies needs to be reversed. Jesse Jackson accentuated this, reminding us about the very goals of democracy that have been neglected in capitalism or neoliberalism dominated policies in various countries of the world. He posits, here are 5 basic promises of democracy. They do not fit the profit-driven marketplace. The first one, equal protection under law, equal opportunity, equal access to resources, fair share of resources, and concern for people who have the least of these. He further accentuates, the marketplace is blind, but democracy is not blind. It has vision. Democracy has vision and values. Democracy is one big tent. There are many races, many faces, many places in one big tent. Excuse me. Do we want to continue to build wealth on the backs of the poor? Well, Pandey and her colleagues accentuate on the need for structural change for well-being like this, that we need to build trust amongst the survivors of structural violence, dehumanization and exclusion, that can be initiated only with the acknowledgement of inequality and injustice. And they also talk about advocating long-term social justice and equity-based policies for economic development as well as public health. Only through these long-term policies, ensuring provision for employment or income guarantee, basic amenities for survival, that is safe and hygienic housing, food and water, and public health measures, well-being of a majority of our citizens may be achieved. Well, that brings us to the final uh, part of this lecture, where it's important to somewhere look at compassion or empathy that's required to somewhere build trust with people who perhaps have been worst affected by various kinds of miseries originating from economic or social hierarchies, as we have seen put forward and emphasized by Jesse Jackson and Pandey and her colleagues. Well, that's the story of lost sheep, recalled in the American Psychological Association address by Jesse Jackson in 1999, and that was published in 2000 in the journal American Psychologist. So what does it say? A shepherd called in his sheep in the evening. 99 came, but one did not. He was worried about it, wanted to go look for it, but some argued that you can't save everyone. And the 99 sheep said, what about us? We came when called. As they argued about whether he should go find the lost sheep, the sun went down. Maybe the one who stayed behind had an auditory problem. Maybe it stepped on glass and was bleeding. Maybe it was kicked by a bigger sheep, or was lost, or in distress, or had been abused. Well, he points out finally, you as good psychologists or students of psychology, as teachers or facilitators of learning in psychology, bring your light to dark places. What are these dark places? We have already seen that the miseries of a majority of world's and Indian citizens due to economic and social hierarchies. Help us find all the lost sheep and leave no one behind. Thank you very much.